Hello and welcome. I am using the moniker Southern Bible Thumper. In this upload, we are starting a new book of the Bible, 1 Samuel. I'd like to take a moment to reintroduce the sources for this channel. First, we have the hard copy of the King James. One of the most important features of the having a hard copy of the Bible is displayed here on the screen. This is a picture of a page out of my Bible. So these numbers here, references, when we look at the very end of a verse, the last line of a verse, and you see this number, these are referencing other parts of the Bible. When you see this, where it just has 2 verse 3, 2 verse 8, this is within the same chapter. And when you see this, like 2 Samuel 14 verse 2, you would turn to this book of the Bible. It's a separate book of the Bible. So the importance of these references is to help establish consistency. When you turn to these, it's supposed to be a similar scenario, or the event that you are reading about here first should be mentioned. So it's going to be either a similar scenario or the incident itself, this information itself, a command. It's supposed to establish consistency. I will say, in my opinion, I've turned to some of these and I felt like I don't see how this relates to each other. But again, I'm not an expert. I'm not a minister. So keep that in mind when I tell you that. So other important features of the Bible. Before the internet was what it is today, books were the primary resource to find information. So, knowing how to extract information quickly was a useful skill. So, at the very beginning of every book, there's a table of contents. Table of contents tells you which number, what page number every chapter starts on. And it also gives you the page numbers of the additional resources in a book. So in my Bible, there's a page for the maps. So like in Joshua, when we were talking about all that territory that's being conquered, that map is in the Bible. I am not that great at reading maps, which is why I didn't even try. Also, boundaries for territories change. So those two reasons together are why I don't get into the maps. The other thing, units of measurement. So when you talk about money or weight for food, there's a separate part in the Bible that translates that into measurements that we use today. Another very valuable feature is the concordance. And concordance in the Bible is similar to a glossary in a textbook. It's a collection of terms that are used in that book. So, the concordance or the glossary provides an additional layer of clarity so that the reader understands exactly what the author means when the terms that are in the glossary or the concordance are used in the book. So that's why it's important. I still use this stuff from time to time. The second resource is BibleGateway.com. Now, this is a useful resource because I just enjoy using this to read on screen. There are all these other translations available. To me, this is overwhelming, which is why I don't use them. BibleRef is what I'd like to use to compare translations. I will explain in a moment, but I'd want to now introduce BibleHub.com. If you follow my duck cursor, each of these highlighted boxes are a different version of the Bible or will display different information about the Bible. If you click on it, I find this overwhelming as well. And this just doesn't help me that much, trying to compare these. The resource that I do appreciate is the Hebrew to English translation. Now, Hebrew was the original text that the Bible was written in. I am aware the Bible has been modified over and over again, but this is the Hebrew right here, these characters. You have to read this from right to left. The punctuation and the numbering are different than what we're used to in the hard copy or on these other websites. And I use the Interlinear Bible as a tiebreaker when I am not finding clarity in BibleRef. Now, BibleRef is the most powerful tool, in my opinion, that I have access to. This streamlines the Bible by providing 7 translations on screen at the same time for every single verse. You can flip through an entire chapter this way, and I found this incredibly useful and helpful. And we're even going to see in this chapter how this is going to help. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start reading 1 Samuel chapter 1. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophiim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. And he had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And when the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters portions. But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah. But the Lord had shut up her womb. And her adversary also provoked her sore for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. And as he did so year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Then said Elkanah, her husband, to her, Hannah, why weepest thou, and why eatest thou not, and why is thy heart grieved? Am not I better to thee than 10 sons? So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord, and she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. And she vowed a vow, and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but wilt give unto thine handmaid a man child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. Now Hannah, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. And Hannah answered and said, No, my lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of my complaint and a grief have I spoken hitherto. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. And she said, Let thine handmaid find grace in thy sight. So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. And they rose up in the morning early, and worshipped before the Lord, and returned, and came to their house to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked him of the Lord. And the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice in his vow. But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I will not go up until the child be weaned, and then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord, and there abide forever. And Elkanah and her husband said unto her, Do what seemeth thee good. Tarry until thou have weaned him. Only the Lord establish his word. So the woman abode and gave her son suck until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bullocks and 1 ephah of flour and a bottle of wine, and brought him unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. And they slew a bullock, and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. Summarizing Samuel chapter 1, the main idea of the first 2 verses is to introduce the characters, Elkanah and his 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, Hannah did not. Verses 3 through 8. Verse 3 is providing additional information on the dynamic of this, the setting of the story, the setting of this chapter. So, verse 3 is telling us Elkanah goes to this place annually in Shiloh, house of worship, and Eli is the priest with his two priest sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Verse 4 is explaining more background information. When Elkanah made sacrifices, he would give portions to Peninnah and her children, and he just gave a good or a double portion to Hannah because she didn't have children. There's two things that I would like to, or three things I would like to point out. First, when it comes to the sacrifices or the contributions to church, the idea was to make sacrifices first. When we look at the beginning of Leviticus, the first three chapters, sometimes sacrifices were made for atonement, and then other times they were made for other reasons, like a free will offering or a peace offering. A free will and peace offering are the same thing. So a free will or a peace offering can be eaten. So there's portions that are allotted for the priest because the priest doesn't have an income. The priest doesn't have a way to support himself. So priests or church officials, they rely on the contributions of the public. But it was supposed to be because they didn't have a job and their whole life was to keep the tabernacle running smoothly. But also, once the the contribution was made to the church and the priests got their portion, then the family was supposed to be able to eat the other portion of the meal. So this is what is being said when he's saying he's making a sacrifice. He's traveling to this place to make a sacrifice, and then he's giving some to his wife, his children, and then his other wife. The second thing I'd like to point out, he loved her. We don't always see the Bible outlining when a man loves his wife. We're very sure that the men love their wives in the Bible, but it's not always emphasized like it is in this chapter. The third thing I'd like to highlight, though the Lord had closed her womb, being from the South, I am used to God being credited for things that are similar to this. For instance, if someone is struck with an illness, the credit will be given to God for striking someone. Well, if it's God's will for you to have that, when all good things come from God. So, God has not spoke to anyone since the end of Judges, if I'm not mistaken. God has not taken responsibility for her womb being closed up. And then later on in the chapter, she was able to get pregnant. So I would just like to suggest that when we see phrases like this, when the Lord did something negative or the Lord is credited with something like this, to just pause and consider that maybe there's not enough information to credit God with that action. We get to verse 6, and verse 6 is saying that her rival or the other wife, if we look in the New Living Translation, it just says the other wife would tease Hannah for not having children. But when we think about it, um, it makes sense that with the characters mentioned so far, Eli and his two sons, Elkanah and his two wives, it seems like the only person I would want to make fun of her in this situation is the other wife. So she would do this year by year. Every time they would go to the house of the Lord, Hannah would weep and not eat, and Elkanah would be concerned about her. And she would ask her, like, why is your heart sad? Don't you think I'm good to you? So, verse 9, after they ate and drank in Shiloh, Hannah rose and she went to pray in the temple. And she wept, and she gave a vow to God, saying that if you give me a boy child, I won't cut his hair, and I'll dedicate him back to you. Verse 12, when we read that Eli marked her mouth, it's just saying that Eli was watching her intently, watched her mouth. He assumed that she was drunk, and he asked her, "How long will you go on being drunk?" So this man of God, who's supposed to be closer to God than the regular parishioners, he didn't have any special clarity that this woman was just sad. For some reason, God didn't lay it on his heart to tell her that she was just sad, so he just assumed. He didn't even have the uh, he didn't have the disposition to say, like, to inquire instead of assume. I just want you to pay attention to that. This man of God, who's supposed to be closer to God, who works in God's things all the time, did not get special information from God when he saw a woman sad. God didn't tell him anything special. So he acted like a regular human and assumed that she was drunk. I just want to put that out there. I just want to explain and point that out. This man of God did not have no special information from God. Okay. So she has to tell him, no, I'm not drunk. Okay, don't regard me as worthless. We saw in King James Belial, and Belial is just a deity that's considered. Um, some sources will say Belial is a demon, but all it's just saying is I'm not worthless. I'm just grieved and anxious. So again, documenting this woman's temperament, this man of God should have known if he didn't know, if God wouldn't reveal to him, he should at least have the disposition to inquire instead of assume. But he didn't. And her response was still respect. And she explained to him why she was sad. He said, "Go." She even says, "Let your servant find favor in your eyes." Wasn't mad at all. Her temperament, Ruth's temperament, Deborah's temperament. These women are not brash. They're not brazen. They're not easy to anger. Loved and respected. Well, we don't know if Ruth was loved, but Ruth was respected by Boaz. All right, so after she was accused of being drunk at church, she left and she was able to conceive, and she bore a boy child, Samuel. So Elkanah went again for his yearly trip. Hannah didn't go because she said she wanted her child to be weaned first. He was supportive. And then when she weaned him, she took uh, him, and there's a discrepancy here because we read 3 bullocks in the King James and the New King James, but when we look at these other translations, it says a 3-year-old bull, a 3-year-old bull. So when we look in the Interlinear, or the closest translation to the original, we look at verse 24. And she took him up with her when she had weaned him with bulls 3. So the Hebrew translation said she had 3 bulls, but when we look at these other translations, it says a 3-year-old bull. And see, that's how I use these sources. I will click because I'm interested, and I will see that there are, some translations saying different things. Then I'll go here to the Interlinear, and the Interlinear is like the tiebreaker. So when Samuel was weaned, she took some things to make us an offering with, and slaughtered the bull and brought the child to Eli. And she's happy to tell him, I'm the woman that was worried the last time you saw me. And I prayed for this child. The Lord has granted my prayer, and I want to lend him to God. So that's all I have for 1 Samuel chapter 1. Thank you so much for watching. I love you. Have a wonderful day.